My name's Herb Johnson. I might be jumping ahead here a little bit, but let's build a real-time Power Automate today. So first of all, I just want to thank the Portland Power Platform User Group for inviting me to present today. I really appreciate it, and Tina for reaching out and scheduling this on their behalf and connecting with me. I really enjoy presenting and sharing my knowledge whenever I can. So as you saw earlier, I'm Herb Johnson. I'm a senior consultant with Stone Ridge Software. You'll see there my connection information. If you're into the QR codes, you can scan that and that'll take you to my LinkedIn profile. Just a little background. I started my IT career in the United States Marine Corps as a mainframe programmer, kind of dating myself there, I guess, but been in Dynamics since 2010. I've worked for Stone Ridge Software since 2019. A couple of hobbies I have is I do get out and run, not really because I like it, mainly because it helps me keep healthy and keeps my blood sugars under control. I'm also an adult fan of Lego, so I got quite a large collection and work with those and assemble those, which kind of goes along with building out software too. And I'm also restoring a 68 Plymouth Roadrunner that I bought in 1985. And actually it's coming around and hopefully it'll be on the road this spring.
We need pictures of both car and Legos at some point.
Okay, I might have to send those to you.
Cool.
Later on. Oh, cool. So today's objectives, I want to have you become more familiarized with real-time versus background processes and kind of what that means. My topic includes something called realized revenue, so we'll talk about that. The key thing here is a real-time Power Automate. I'm going to go air quotes on that because there's different definitions, but we'll talk about that a little bit. JavaScript is involved in making this happen along with JSON. And then we're going to be looking at how all that works together to make this happen. So in the agenda, I'll go into the background of where this came about and what requirements came to make this happen. You're going to see it in action. I'll show you the big picture. We'll talk through that a little bit, and then we'll look individually at the different solution components. And then we'll look at it again now that you've seen the solution components and stuff and can get a better idea of what's going on there piece by piece. Excuse me. And then we'll look at the key takeaways from what we saw today and then share some references that I used in developing this and that you can use going forward if you want to build something else similar. So it's been a while now, but we got a use case from one of our clients that as a VP of finance, they needed to capture when an opportunity revenue would be realized so that they could be more informed in decision-making about budgeting and forecasting and resource allocation. And eventually they wanted to utilize the goals feature within Dynamics 365 sales. So after some discussion and discovery, we came up with putting together a real-time calculation on the opportunity form to see when this revenue would be realized, and then they could build a dashboard and so on out of that. So Power Automate real-time versus background. So when I talk about real-time, I'm talking about something that is synchronous or a process that runs immediately. It's not waiting for anything. And the initiator or whoever calls this process to trigger it, to get it going, is waiting for it to finish. The difference is, with the background or asynchronous processes, that's kind of the typical Power Automates that we have today and that we know of, similar to some of the legacy workflows that we know and love. But those processes are triggered maybe with a data update or a creation or changes of specific fields. And they take their own path and the initiator continues on. So it kind of goes this way and then you go that way and it'll finish later on and then you can check back if you need to, or it'll be there in the future. So realized revenue, I had to look this up initially a while back to see what it was, but this is when the cash will be received. So a few examples are the day your paycheck shows up in your account, that's when you realized that revenue from your prior 2 weeks or month or however that goes of work. Or as a person pays for an item at the store. So if you go in the big box store, you buy that 80-inch TV or however the going rate size is today. When you actually pay for that, swipe your credit card, that's when the store will realize that revenue. And then from more of a business perspective that most of us are in, when a client actually pays for the goods or services that they've received. So when it actually shows up in that account at the bank and you can actually see the funds actively there. So just recap the agenda, we just covered the background. The next thing you know, what we're going to do is we're going to see it in action. So I'm going to switch over to my sandbox environment and move over to my opportunity form. Let's see, here we go. So just to give you a rundown, we have built out another tab in an opportunity form called realized revenue. We've added a few fields. So we got a start date and an end date. So that's that time frame when we want to see that revenue broken down. In the we have an interval here between weekly or monthly, kind of depending on when they want to, how they want to break it down. So as you can see, I've run this between April 1st and November 4th of 2024 for an estimated revenue of $15 million and $7. I leave it at $7 so I can get that odd number in there. You can see we kind of calculated it out. And the key here is this last entry will have that $6 difference if it doesn't divide evenly. So what we can do here is just as a demo, I'm going to switch this to monthly. And when I hit save, it's going to trigger that process. And you'll see we've got this nice notification telling us that it's calculating the realized revenue breakdown. We've got this nice spinny circle going there. I think that's the official Microsoft name for it. And it'll keep running and it kind of keeps you in waiting and until it's done. So keep in mind that the Power Automate behind the scenes, it's important to try to make it as efficient as possible so it runs quickly so the user doesn't wait too long. But being this is a sandbox, of course, we don't have the horsepower of a production system. And as it's going through here, one of the first things it does is it deletes the existing revenue breakdown and then it calculates and does the whole new one. So you can see here, this started out April 1st, which is my start date. And we went monthly each day after that until the beginning of the month was the same month as our end date of that revenue. So that end date is in between our from and to realized. And you can see our breakdown numbers divided evenly except for that last month, which has that extra dollar value. And we can change the dates here too to make it go a little quicker if this is going to be a nice short one. We'll just do that again. See how it kind of blinked on us while it's processing. It's going to delete all the existing ones that we just generated earlier and then generate the new ones. And there we have it, 2 months worth of revenue broken down. And you'll see the 3 and the 4 here. That adds up to our estimated revenue. All right, so we just saw that in action. And now we're going to go have a look at the big picture here. So what's involved in doing this? We have our salespeople will create or save an opportunity with the realized revenue dates and the interval that they are looking to generate it for. Once they hit save, it comes down here. We have a JavaScript web resource that triggers on save. And it has a function that gathers some information from the opportunity and passes it on to the Power Automate. And as we go to the Power Automate, we execute that. We have our Power Automate cloud flow that runs. And when it completes, it returns back a response of success or fail back to the JavaScript, which in turn collects that and returns it back to the user on the form by closing off that circle and notification. We saw the big picture. Now let's have a look at the solution components, which include, in my case, we have a couple of tables involved here. We got a Power Automate, we got our JavaScript and our form. So I'm going to go back to my solution and have a look here. So we've got the first thing on our list here is some choices we just have created on this for the selection of the realized revenue. That's our weekly and monthly. So not terribly complicated there, just added a choice so we could put it within that form. Jump down to the tables quick. The opportunity table, that's the one we're using. We made some changes there. Our realized revenue is a brand new table that we use, and that's our subgrid that we were showing where all those calculations ended up, the breakdown ended up being saved in, so you can see those in that subgrid. And then we have our web resource. So going into these in a little bit more detail, I'll pull up the opportunity form. And you'll see here, just we have that table or the tab for the realized revenue. We've got our start date, our end date, our interval, and then our subgrid, which points to our custom table for those broken down realized revenues by time frame. The key here though is on save. For the form, we have an event handler, and you'll see here we have it's on save, and the library or the web resource is our STN opportunity realized revenue that I've selected, and we have that function within that we run. We want to make sure it's enabled, and we're passing the context of as the first parameter. This gives us the ability to pull data out of this revenue, or out of this opportunity, so we can do the correct relationships within the Power Automate to those records. So just a couple of columns here that I'll point out. We have some dates, we start end dates, we've got our interval, we've got an interval quantity that we use for working with these calculations. The other thing I'm going to jump into here is the JavaScript. I just have it in a text editor here that we have. So the Power Automate, or the form on save, executes this function and passes the execution context. And with that, we're able to grab off the opportunity form the current opportunity, unique ID or GUID, that start date that the user sets, the end date, and then the interval. And then we also grab that revenue so we know what to divide out. You can kind of see the JavaScript that we use to get that. And this is involved with the object library that Microsoft provides us for Dynamics 365. So as we go down here, the next thing I do is I make sure I have all the data items I need with data in them to do this calculation successfully. If I don't, then I just close my indicator and I return it. And then as we continue down, I build a parameter array or parameter objects that contains our data that we're bringing in from that form. And as we're building this out, we come down here, we've got this URL, which actually is the URL for the Power Automate that we're executing. So we're building this out. We got this request. So we're going to open, we're going to do a post. This is a little more complex than a person really wants to get into, and then we use the XRM utility to check the ready state And when it's returned, was it successful? Then we return the result. Excuse me. We refresh the form, and then we close off the indicator. If there is an error, we want to pass that error to the user on the form and not do the save so they can continue on or see what was going on, maybe the error or something. And then finally, we built this whole request out so far. And then here is where we actually start the spinning. And you'll see here we've got our name, or not our name, but our information that we're passing to the user so they know what's going on. At first I did this and it was just spinning, and I'm like, I got to have something there to tell people that what's happening so they don't get bored or wonder what's going on. And this is the actual command that passes the parameters and starts that Power Automate. So ideally, this isn't too terribly complex. A person could take this and reuse it and change just a few variables here. Maybe check some different variables, for the indicator here to make sure that they have what you need. And then put those in a variable to create it, and then change the URL if they have a new Power Automate that they're gonna build out. So with that, I'm gonna move into the Power Automate that we have here. So this Power Automate, what kind of makes this more of a real-time type Power Automate is this trigger that's called when an HTTP request is received. And I'll show you kind of how to make that or get that initial trigger going here after a bit. But once you add the trigger and you hit save, it generates this URL, and you can copy that URL, and that's the same URL that we pasted right here to call. So anytime you create a new Power Automate with a new trigger like that, you're going to get a different URL. So you want to make sure that you've got the right one. And then you can see I built out this JSON schema to collect the data that I'm passing it. So this is where it comes in. Now, as we go down, I'm building out a couple of variables that I need to use. First one is I'm getting that opportunity GUID, and I'm having to use this substring expression to strip out the first and last character of that GUID, and you can kind of see how that is stated right here. Because then that GUID comes in, it's going to have the curly brackets on either end, the first character and the last character, and we need to take that off so we can use it within our Dataverse actions. I've got a variable loop date that I'm defining based on the realized revenue start date. So I'll be using that when I'm looping through and figuring out what I'm dividing by and so on. And then I just have a variable for my loop count. So as I'm figuring out how many weeks I have to calculate it for, or how many months I have to calculate it for, this is where I hold that end result. So I know I'm going to divide that estimated revenue by this number and being able to put that in the records that I create. And then here I have my variable for my interval quantity used for calculating the splits for the realized revenue. So now that I have these, I have my scope, or it encapsulates my main process, which is divided into 3 other scopes. The first one, I do a list rows of my realized revenue where my selected row, which is the opportunity GUID, so the value here, you can see, is equal to the variable that I passed in to it. So then I get the list of the existing revenue rows, and I loop through each one and I delete those. That way I get a clean list of revenues if I'm changing from weekly to monthly, or maybe adjusting the dates to see how I can better fit that revenue into what our objectives are or plans. I've always been looking for a better way to do a delete of rows without using an apply to each, because this is kind of slow, and I would like to find a faster way to do that. The next thing I do is I'm calculating the interval quantity. So I need to loop through from my beginning date to my ending date and see how many intervals I have, whether it be weeks or months, so I know what to divide by. And you can see here we're having to use some expressions within this do until. So what ticks is it's an expression that figures out a, now I can't remember offhand, but like the number of milliseconds since a certain date many, many, many years ago. And it's a more specific way, an accurate way to compare two different dates versus trying to compare the date in itself. And you can see how this expression here is what this condition equates to as we built this out. So as we're looping through here, we're incrementing our loop. So we're getting that count. And then we're setting our loop date variable, excuse me, our loop date to the next month or the next week based on that. You'll see this is the expression of that variable here. If I click into it, it is quite large, and it's hard to see with this version of the flow editor. With the newer version, you get a much bigger box here to look at. So I go through that loop to get that interval. And then once it's done, I set that variable here to that quantity. So now I know how many splits or records to create. So in this scope here, this is where I'm going to start creating those records. I initialize my variable back to 0 for my loop count so I can get started there. And I set my original start date back, and I format that. You'll see that expression there with the format date, grabbing the triggered body start date and formatting it a month, day, year. And then we go into another do until loop. We got a similar expression with our ticks, with our dates to compare. And we're basically doing the same sort of loop, but this time we're creating a realized revenue record, and we're associating it with the opportunity. Now, one of the tricks I found I could use is when you have a required variable, but you really don't want to put anything in it, when you do the add a new row for the Dataverse, you can just tell it to put null in there. And that'll get you past that required field and also just leave it blank. We're associating it to our opportunity with that variable we passed in. And now we're setting our realized revenue date from and our date to. In this expression, which is also quite large, we check to see if it's the week that we're doing or if it's the month we're doing, and we're setting it based on that. I should try to let me grab this and put it here so you can get a better look at that expression. So you can see we check to see if it's equal to this ID, which I can't remember if that's the weeks or the month. I think that's the month. And then we add to time, and then if it's not, we do the week. And you see that here. So I could dive into that more later if we'd like. Similar takes place for the to date. We just start grabbing a different date when we're doing that. And then we have our realized revenue. You can see we're doing some expressions here to manipulate the date. We're doing a division based on a trigger and the variable of quantity. We're also doing a mod, which gets us that extra few dollars on that last record when we reach to that point. And then we increment our loop count, and we also increment our variable date with this expression too. And once all that's done, we have two paths we can go down. If any of this failed above, it'll go down our fail path and it'll return or respond to our JavaScript with a 400 code and pass back an error that we need to contact IT and have them look at the Power Automate to see what happened. Otherwise, we get the success that comes back. Let's see, is there any other items here that I missed out on? This is connection reference. That's our connection to the Dataverse that Power Automate uses to read those records and update and do the delete.
And really quickly, Herb, Pranam just
Sure.
had a question in the chat. Do you create these expressions within Power Automate Cloud, or do you create them on VS Code or some other code editor IDE?
I create them right in Power Automate. I can show you a little example of that after a bit here too. So one thing I want to make sure that I always tend to kind of leave this out and trying not to. So to create that Power Automate, you start out by going into the automation cloud flow. I just click instant. I click skip. And then in here, we want to search for, and I'll scroll back over, when an HTTP request is received. And you'll see it right here when an HTTP request is received. So I'm going to click on that. And you'll see it comes in here and it gives us the option, okay, do we want specific users to be able to call this or any users within our tenant? I've set it to any users. So I didn't want to get too involved in like security roles in this at that point, but you can if you'd like. This is where that URL will get generated, and this is where you put the schema. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a compose in here so we can save this. And let's open this up again. So when we click save, let's see over here, we are saving. Now you see there's this URL that got generated. We can copy that out. And then what we would do then is when we put together our JavaScript back here, we would paste that in between our quotes in the JavaScript, and that's how it knows which Power Automate to trigger or to run. All right. Moving right along. Let's see, what do we got? We looked at our components, got the solution components. All right, so now that you kind of see what it took to build that out and put it together, let's go back and just kind of run through this again. So as you saw, we were passing it our estimated revenue, we're passing the start date, the end date, and our interval. So I'm going to just change this to week. And you saw in that first part, that first scope, what we did is we read these records back in and we remove these existing ones before we create the new ones. So we click save, which triggers that on save event, calling that Power Automate. And that Power Automate builds that package to send over to the Power Automate Cloud Flow. And as it does that, sends us, it gives us this message that it's calculating the realized revenue breakdown. The Power Automate ran, it did the calculations. It updated the records or created new records and then sent back to completion, and we refreshed our form with all these new values. And here's where that mod expression comes into play. It checks to see if it's the last record it's creating, and it does a mod and does some addition there also to make that happen. So we saw it again. Now we understand or see what it takes. Couple key takeaways I hope you got from my presentation today is in building a real-time Power Automate is that within the Power Platform, there's multiple components working together to solve this business need. You saw how to build that real-time Power Automate. You saw that we were using JavaScript to communicate with the Power Automate and the opportunity form, both to the Power Automate and back to the form. So multi-direction or both directions to make that happen. And you saw how we kind of use that JavaScript object notation to build out that object of parameters to send over to the Power Automate Cloudflow itself. And then you just saw kind of the power of Power Automate itself and the things we can do with that Power Automate. Just it's such an awesome tool and so much that we can do to it also.
Really quick.
Yes.
And Tina, I don't know if you mentioned this already, but Pranam is also asking, where can I find logic to calculate days, weeks, etc., to build expressions in Power Automate? Is there Microsoft documentation available? Which I know there is, and I'm helping find the link, but I don't know if there's anything additional from the Microsoft documentation you'd recommend. Or
yeah, it's I don't, you'd think I paid you to ask that question at this moment. But great timing there with that question, because here's the references I used when I was building this out. So Microsoft Learn has really come a long way over the past few years with some great information on just all their products and how to do things. You can see here, like getting started with Power Automate. If you're new to it, that's a great place to go to learn about Power Automate and get your feet wet and get started too. And I guess I'll put a shameless plug. My presentation in Denver in May will also kind of go over from a user's perspective, getting started in Power Automate and doing some simple things to help your day. Also, something to do is search the web, whether it's Bing or Google or however you want to search, for trigger a Power Automate flow via HTTP request. There's some good information, there's some good videos on how to make that happen. So that's that piece where I triggered and I had to hit save and it gave me a URL that I could call from the JavaScript. So that'll give you some good insight there. I also use the W3C schools a lot for just some JavaScript tutorials. I use it for HTML, even Cascade style sheets, because you can all use all that within Power Automate to do various things and formatting, even documents and emails and things like that. So it's a very handy place to go. And also, I took advantage of the JavaScript Power Apps API, also known as the XRM.utility that Microsoft has developed that's built right into the D365 Power Platform, the sales app, the marketing app, all that sort of stuff. And I found information on that also on the Microsoft Learn site. You see that reference there to that URL. And you can also search for blogs on that sort of stuff too. There's a lot of good information. And a good tutorial to get started to learn a little bit of JSON is that link there. I found that very handy to explain JSON, what it is and kind of how it works. So I recommend you check out all these different references. JSON is something that's used throughout all of Microsoft's stack for communications and things like that. So it's a good item to learn and get some information on, become informed in. And we got through the references. Looks like we got through all the rest of the agenda there. So I'm going to open up for questions if we have time. I'm not sure.
We absolutely do have time.
Okay. yeah, I'll be happy to go back and we can look at a couple things and talk about that. I think the first thing I actually want to do before we get too involved here, I want to go back into, okay, where are we? So there was a question related to expressions. And I want to go in here and you'll see how it went right into the new designer for cloud flows, which has taken me a while to get used to because I spent a lot of time in the old designer, so it's taken a little bit. But what I want to share here is, so like in an input here, we have this function or expression area, which we can click and open up, and you'll see they have in here where it's got a list of all these functions available and expressions that you can work with. And there's so much information here that you can do. And up, let's see, does it show us here? There used to be a link here for expressions. Yeah, here we go. So you click on that, you can get into that Microsoft Learn site, and it starts talking you through expressions and how to use them and different things. Functions is also used instead of the term expressions too. But this box is pretty nice because you can just start typing, for instance, date. Maybe I want to format or see the date difference. You'll see the different possibilities of things you can do. Like here's the date format. You put that open parenthesis, it gives you the format of or what this expression is expecting. So it's like a date timestamp, a string, a format, and so on. So it'll walk you right through that. And another fun thing about this, or I find really fun, is that you can nest many functions with other functions. And there's a lot of different videos out there on that too. So I forget who asked that question, but I hope that helps you see where you can build that out and you can kind of explore these different expressions, what they can do. Like here's the if one, you can even just click on that and it'll start that. And I've used like the empty function. Oops, sorry, I tabbed off of that. Empty, click on that. Start to build that out. It's expecting an object string or an array. So what this does is I can just put even quotes and something in here, but the empty function will return whether or not what you're passing it has something in it or not. It's kind of like checking if it is null or not. And then you hit comma here and you got, okay, here's my if expression. What's my true, what I'm going to do with the true value or what am I going to do with the false value? And you can just start building into there too if you want to format a date or format a number and so on. So a lot of cool stuff like that happen. Similar to what you can do in Excel with their expressions and functions, but a little different naming conventions and stuff like that.
Did that answer your question? Or, if you have any other follow-on questions? Awesome. He says, yes,
Good.
that helped a lot.
Excellent. That's good. I'm glad I can help.
I think it's also worth mentioning, Lee said, great presentation and thank you. So just passing that along.
Thank you.
Any other questions? It's great to use this time. I know we have a little additional time left over. So if you guys have questions about Power Automate, want to stump Herb, this is your time to do it.
And I'm okay if you stump me because that tells me I'm going to go learn about something else and then come back stronger next time. So
That's the fun part, right?
yep. I love learning and there's just so much out there and Microsoft changing stuff so fast and adding things to it. That's just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you very much. I appreciate this time and being able to share with y'all.